Have you ever wondered if God wanted to reach you, how would he actually do it? Not with some booming voice from the clouds, not through burning bushes or dramatic signs in the sky. He takes the simplest route possible, straight through your own mind, where the tiniest whisper becomes divine language. Carl Jung once said that among all the noise rattling around in our heads, there's one voice that doesn't spring from fear or from the ego, but from the deepest chamber of the soul, the place that plugs directly into God himself. But here's the problem. We've completely forgotten how to listen. We're out there searching for him in churches, in complicated rituals, in lengthy prayers, totally missing that sometimes he's speaking through every random thought, every gut feeling, every quiet moment we brush off without a second thought. Today, we're diving into something both spiritual and deeply psychological. Did you know God can speak to you through your mind? Stop ignoring him, because when you finally learn to listen, I mean really listen, your entire life shifts. Coincidences stop being random, pain stops being pointless, and silence becomes the language God speaks best. Stick around until the end, and don't just listen with your ears, listen with your soul. This might be the first time you actually hear his voice. Number 1, the voice we mistake for our own. Have you ever been sitting there on some completely ordinary day when suddenly this faint thought drifts into your mind and it almost feels like it doesn't belong to you? Yet it stops you cold, maybe even brings tears to your eyes? A reminder, an idea, or just this subtle push. Call that person. Stop. Forgive. It's not loud. It's not commanding. It just floats through your consciousness like a gentle breeze, but it leaves behind this strange peace, as if someone's speaking to you without using any words at all. Carl Jung called this the voice of the soul, where the deepest part of who you are tries to reach your conscious mind. He believed that when we think we're thinking, the unconscious is actually doing the talking. Inside every single person, there's this divine fragment connected to everything, what religion calls God and what Jung called the self, the center of the soul. That's where these first whispers are born, not through sound, but through feeling. We all assume we're in control of our thoughts, but Jung warned us, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. Some thoughts don't come from logic at all. They come from the deep unconscious, where the collective memory of all humanity lives, where all souls intersect, and where God is still speaking. Think back. How many times have you had this feeling that something wasn't right and it turned out to be true? How many times were you about to do something and this quiet voice said, "Don't," and you avoided disaster because of it? There are these moments we can't explain, we can only feel. And in that feeling, the divine is right there. A friend once told me she was driving to work when suddenly this very soft voice in her mind said, "Turn back." She had no idea why, but the urge was so strong she actually stopped the car and went home. The second she opened the door, she saw the gas cylinder leaking. A few more minutes, and the whole place could have gone up in flames. She said, "I knew someone was speaking to me." Sometimes God doesn't bother with miracles, doesn't send angels, doesn't appear in flames. He just drops a tiny thought into your mind. And if you're still enough, you'll catch it. Jung believed we're not separate individuals at all. We're part of this vast spiritual current where thoughts, emotions, and symbols are all interconnected. When you get quiet enough, you start to touch that current. Like a radio, you don't create the signal. You just need to tune to the right frequency. And the frequency of God, it's not found in noise or fear. It's in the silence between two breaths. In that moment when you let go of trying to control everything and just sit still and feel, you'll realize he was never silent. You just never truly listened. Someone once asked Jung, "Do you believe in God?" He smiled and said, "I don't need to believe. I know." That answer didn't come from blind faith, it came from direct experience of the soul, because he had heard that voice, not with his ears, but with his mind, not through reason, but through presence. And you can too. God doesn't pick perfect people to speak to. He speaks to whoever dares to be still. You don't need to become some monk living in a cave. He can speak to you right in the middle of your regular life while you're working, washing dishes, or just breathing. A thought softly arrives. Don't say that. It will hurt someone. A small voice whispers, "Forgive not for them, but for yourself." A faint intuition. Don't take this path today. Each time you follow it, you're having a conversation with him. That's not superstition. That's communication between consciousness and the unconscious, between humanity and the divine spark within. Picture your mind like the surface of the ocean. On top, waves are crashing, winds are blowing, foam is scattering everywhere. That's thought, worry, all the noise of the world. But if you dive deep enough, underneath all that chaos lies absolute stillness. There, all voices dissolve, leaving only the breath of the soul. And it's in that depth that God speaks, not through words, but through presence. He doesn't need to shout for you to hear him. He only needs you to be silent enough to realize that the voice you're searching for out there is actually whispering inside you. So next time a thought makes you pause, fills you with peace or tears, don't brush it off. Stay with it. Listen. And know that maybe, just maybe, it's the voice of God. Number 2. When we can't hear God's voice. If God is still speaking, then why do most of us never hear him? What made his voice fade into the background noise of modern life? In our age, the hardest thing to find isn't opportunity, it's silence. Every single day we wake up bombarded by hundreds of notifications, messages, deadlines, praise, criticism. And in that tornado, we think we're living. But really, we're so crammed full that there's no space left for the voice of the soul. Carl Jung once said, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul." And maybe the most terrifying thing isn't that God is silent, it's that we're no longer quiet enough to hear him. God never stops speaking. But today's human mind is like a room with dozens of speakers blasting at once. Each sound is an echo of fear, fear of being forgotten, fear of not being enough, fear of being replaced. Each noise is part of the persona, that mask we wear to be loved and accepted. When we're too busy becoming the image others want to see, we lose the ability to hear ourselves. Think about the last time you sat completely still, no phone, no music, doing absolutely nothing. You probably felt uncomfortable, maybe even anxious, because in the silence, the inner voices start rising up. What am I doing with my life? Am I truly happy? That's not random, that's the call of the soul. But most of us quickly cover our ears, open social media, and keep running. A viewer once shared that after losing her father, she threw herself into work. 14 hours a day, conferences, parties on the surface, she had it all. Money, fame, beauty. But at night, she felt this emptiness nothing could fill. One day, on the subway, she saw a homeless man reading an old Bible. He looked up, smiled, and asked, "When was the last time you listened?" That question haunted her for days. She started turning off her phone in the morning and sitting quietly for 10 minutes. At first, her mind was chaos, but gradually she noticed this faint stream of thought, not from reason, but carrying peace. One morning during meditation, she heard, "Call your mother." She did. A few hours later, her mother got into a minor accident. She arrived just in time. Later, she said, "I used to think God only spoke to special people, but he was always speaking. I was just too noisy to hear." That's what Jung meant by the persona, the social mask we wear to survive. It's not evil, but if we forget who we are beneath it, we lose the ability to hear the truth from within. We confuse the applause of the world with the whisper of the soul. And here's the paradox. The more successful we become in other people's eyes, the further we drift from God's voice. I once heard about a woman who went to a priest complaining, "I pray all the time, but God never speaks to me." The priest smiled and said, "Have you ever been silent enough to let him speak?" That answer, simple but piercing. God still speaks, but we're always thinking too much, doing too much. Jung believed the connection with God doesn't lie in rituals, but in the moment a person pauses to talk with their soul. Sometimes silence is the language God loves most. He doesn't need explanation or logic. He only needs you to be present. As it says in Psalm 46:10, "Be still and know that I am God." In stillness, you stop seeking God outside and start recognizing him inside your own mind. Start small. 5 minutes every morning. No music, no phone, no plans. Just sit quietly and ask, "God, what do you want me to know today?" You might not hear anything right away, but if you're patient, one day in an ordinary moment, a thought will come and you'll know it wasn't from you. Number 3. The difference between God's voice and the ego's voice. When you begin to hear that voice soft, gentle, yet clear, another question pops up. How do I know if it's God's voice and not just my own? Because sometimes both come from within. Both sound familiar, but one brings peace, the other anxiety. One opens the heart, the other locks it in fear. That's why Jung emphasized, not every thought in your mind is true. He made a distinction between the ego, the self-image, and the self, the divine center of the soul. Both exist, but only one speaks through light. The voice of the ego usually comes first, loudest and most logical. It says things like, be careful, don't trust anyone, you have to prove yourself. If you fail, everyone will laugh at you. But the voice of the soul comes later, light as breath. Do the right thing even when no one's watching. Forgive. Love without needing to win. Jung called this the eternal dialogue between the self and the whole. One side tries to control, the other just wants you to return home. You can feel the difference not through logic, but through energy in your body. When the ego speaks, you shrink, your chest tightens, your breath gets shallow. When the soul speaks, you expand. Your heart opens as if a small beam of light passes through your chest. I once heard about a woman named Daniela, a neurosurgeon. During a surgery lasting over 10 hours, everything started spiraling out of control. Under pressure, her hands began trembling. A harsh voice in her head shouted, "You're going to ruin everything. You're not good enough." She tried to ignore it, but the more anxious she got, the louder it became. Then, in the middle of the chaos, another voice appeared, very soft. "Breathe. Trust your hands." Daniela paused, closed her eyes for a second, took a deep breath, and in that moment all the tension vanished. Everything became clear. The surgery succeeded. When she told this story, she said, "I don't know who spoke to me, but I knew it wasn't me." That's what Jung called the voice of the self, the voice from the center of the soul where God dwells in man. Jung didn't see God as some separate being floating around, but as the supreme symbol of psychic order, the place where all the scattered pieces of the psyche come together. When you hear that voice, it's not that he's outside, it's that he's speaking through you. But here's where it gets tricky. The ego can imitate God's voice too. It knows how to make you believe you're being guided when really it's just rationalizing your desires and fears. You can hear it in phrases like, "I must show them that God is with me," or "I'm sure this is my divine mission because I want it." But God's real voice never forces. It never rushes or demands. It only invites. Jung once wrote, "Who looks outside, dreams. Who looks inside, awakes." When you begin to look within, you'll find two voices speaking at once, one fearful and calculating, the other gentle and wise. Spiritual maturity is learning to know who's speaking. If you want to know who's speaking in your mind, don't ask what is it saying. Ask how does it make me feel. The ego speaks to control. The soul speaks to free. And maybe that's why God chose to speak through your mind, because it's the meeting point between soul and world. But only in stillness can you know who's speaking within you, God or your own fear. Number 4. When God speaks through symbols, after learning to tell God's voice from the egos, you'll realize something else. Sometimes he doesn't speak in words at all, because words belong to the language of the mind, while God often speaks in the language of symbols, coincidences, and events that seem random but carry uncanny meaning. Carl Jung called this synchronicity, meaningful coincidence, when outer events mirror the inner state of the soul. Jung believed the unconscious doesn't exist only within the individual but also within what he called the collective unconscious, where all souls connect through archetypal symbols. And it's at this intersection that God speaks not through sound, but through meaning. A recurring dream. A number appears again and again, a song playing at the exact moment of confusion. All are his way of whispering, "I am here." In a Jungian therapy session, I once met a woman named Maria, an artist from Spain. After a devastating heartbreak, she lost all faith in life. One night, she dreamed she was lost in a dark forest when a white owl flew past her. The next morning, scrolling through her phone, she saw an artwork suggested on Instagram, the exact same white owl. Strange, but she ignored it. The next day, heading home, a bus passed with a giant picture of a white owl printed on it. That evening, she got an email from a gallery inviting her to join an exhibition titled The Owl of Transformation. Maria burst into tears. She said, "I realized God didn't tell me to paint again, he sent a symbol. And when I was quiet enough to notice, I knew he was saying, live again." Jung taught that symbols are the language of the soul, beyond logic. Modern people believe only what's rational deserves trust. But spirituality doesn't operate through linear reasoning. Dreams, art, coincidence, intuition, these are the grammar of God. Synchronicity isn't a miracle, it's a sign. Like when you're struggling with a decision and suddenly a line on a billboard or a song lyric says exactly what you needed to hear. Science calls it pattern recognition, the brain's tendency to seek meaning. But Jung added that when the soul longs deeply for something, the universe mirrors it back. He wrote, "Synchronicity is an ever-present reality for those who have eyes to see." And truly, people with rich inner lives experience synchronicity more often. Not because they're superstitious, but because they're awake. They observe, feel, and notice the hidden threads woven through everyday life. Think of Joseph in the Bible, betrayed, sold into slavery, imprisoned. Yet he trusted that an invisible hand was weaving everything together. Years later, he became ruler of Egypt, saving the very people who had wronged him. Looking back, Joseph said, "You meant evil against me, but God meant it for good." A perfect example of synchronicity, everything happening in the right way at the right time, guiding the soul home. When we live unaware of these symbols, life feels random, fragmented. But when we awaken, every small detail, a feather on the road, a stranger's glance, a passing phrase, becomes sacred language. God doesn't need thunder to speak. He only needs you to look closer. So when you notice repeating signs, don't dismiss them. Pause and ask, what does this mean? Not every coincidence is God's voice, but every voice of God comes through synchronicity. It arrives exactly when you need it, in the way you can understand, and at the depth your soul is ready for. Number 5. When suffering becomes the soul's calling, there are times in life when you don't hear God in prayer, don't see any signs in dreams, only emptiness. You wake up with no motivation. Things that once brought joy now feel distant. You think you're falling apart, but sometimes in that very moment, God is speaking, not through words, but by quieting all the noise in your life. He doesn't take your joy, he removes what hides his voice. Carl Jung called this the pain of awakening. He said, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain." When the soul prepares to enter a new level of awareness, it has to break the old structures, beliefs, identities, roles you've been clinging to. Just like a seed must crack open to sprout, pain is the sign of being born again. Because in truth, pain doesn't only wound, it empties. And in that emptiness, the divine can enter. When belief systems collapse, when the mind has nothing left to hold on to, you're forced to turn inward where the soul has been patiently waiting. Jung called this the moment of center shift, when you stop living from the outer ego and start living from the inner essence. What you thought was the end is actually the beginning of deeper existence, where silence becomes prayer and suffering becomes the doorway to grace. I remember the story of a university professor who was suspended after a small administrative mistake. She lost her job, her reputation shattered, and for months, she fell into despair. One night, in her darkest moment, she dreamed she was in a dark room holding a candle. When the flame went out, a voice said, "The light doesn't come from the candle, it comes from you." She woke up filled with this strange peace. She later said, "I realized I'd lived my whole life seeking recognition, trying to be seen as capable and respectable. But when everything fell apart, I saw that God hadn't taken anything from me. He only removed what was blocking me from myself." She returned to teaching, but this time she no longer tried to be perfect. She taught about spirituality, about listening to the soul. She said, "I no longer pray for God to save me. I ask, what is he trying to teach me through this pain?" Pain, in Jung's view, is God's secret language. When what you think you need most is taken away, the soul says you've been relying on the wrong source. God doesn't punish, he liberates. And sometimes that liberation begins with destruction. Jung wrote that every spiritual crisis is an invitation from the unconscious to reconnect with the divine center. Pain doesn't destroy the soul, it destroys the ego. When the ego cracks, the mind opens. And in that opening, God's voice can finally be heard. Modern neuroscience actually sees something similar. After major loss or trauma, the brain reorganizes its neural networks. It rebuilds itself. In other words, after every deep suffering, both brain and soul restructure toward greater compassion and awareness. Pain is how the soul grows. Like metal refined in fire, the soul becomes clear through trials. God doesn't want us to suffer, but he knows that sometimes only suffering makes us willing to listen. So if you're in pain today, don't rush to conclude that God is silent. Maybe he's just speaking another language, the language of breaking. And while you think you're losing everything, you're actually being taught to hear with your heart. Let every crack in you become where light enters. Because sometimes God's voice doesn't come from heaven, it echoes from the place where you're broken. Number 6. Listening by living. In truth, God doesn't only speak in sacred moments, in dreams or coincidences. He speaks through your everyday actions, through how you face life. Jung once wrote, "You are what you do, not what you say you'll do." In other words, the way you live is your answer to God. Hearing God's voice isn't just a skill, it's a way of living. Every time you're honest with yourself, forgive without being asked, or choose love over judgment, you're listening to Him. Every time you say no to what no longer aligns with your soul, even if it disappoints others, you're honoring that divine dialogue. Because God doesn't speak for you to just hear, He speaks for you to live differently. Carl Jung believed true consciousness only forms when you begin to live according to your inner knowing. You can read 1,000 spiritual books, meditate for hours, but if you keep betraying your soul in daily life, pretending to be fine when you're not, pleasing others when your heart resists, then you haven't truly listened. I once met a woman named Marianne, an interior designer in Los Angeles. For years she followed the perfect plan: successful husband, beautiful home, thriving career. Yet every morning when she looked in the mirror, she saw an exhaustion she couldn't name. "I pray every day," she said, "but I never hear God." One day at church, she sat in silence. No voice came, only this small thought: if you no longer believe in this life, start again with what makes you feel alive. The next day, she quit her job, moved back to her hometown, and started painting. Her friends asked, "Are you crazy?" She smiled, "I'm just listening." Years later, her paintings were exhibited internationally, but she said, "What matters isn't that they sold, it's that I came back to life again." When your actions reflect what your soul knows is right, you no longer need to seek God's voice. You become that voice. Because God doesn't speak through promises, but through action. When you choose honesty, even if it costs you comfort, when you choose compassion instead of anger, He's speaking through you. That's why Jung believed listening isn't just a meditative state, it's a way of being. A truly listening person doesn't need to declare their faith. It radiates from their gestures, their eyes, the way they move through the world without losing their inner stillness. Think of it like a piano. If the soul isn't tuned, no matter how skilled the musician, the sound will be off. But when your soul aligns with the divine, when thought, emotion, and action vibrate at the same frequency, life begins to play like a melody that God Himself is performing. You stop seeking Him because every note you live, every breath you take, already is Him. In history, one woman embodied this truth through her way of living: Mother Teresa. She didn't preach God through grand speeches, but through service, tending to the dying, washing the forgotten, loving the unloved. When asked, "Do you hear God speak to you?" she smiled, "I hear Him in every person I touch." She didn't wait for signs from heaven. She became the sign. Jung once wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." Once you understand that listening is no longer about hearing something external, it's about living every moment in rhythm with Him, then you'll see God. Never left. He's always been here. So if you're still searching for His voice, don't just look up to the sky. Look into your life, into every small act, every daily choice. If you live with presence, honesty, and compassion, you're not just hearing Him, you're letting Him live through you. And then you'll realize God doesn't just speak to you, He sings through your very life. Number 7. When you become His channel, when a person truly listens, they no longer need to prove their faith. They simply are. And in that presence, people around them feel peace without a single sermon being preached. Remember, God doesn't need perfect people. He needs willing souls. What makes you His channel isn't holiness, it's openness. He speaks through the humble, through those who no longer hide behind the ego, but dare to live in love. And you'll notice when your soul opens, everything begins to align. You meet the right people at the right time for the right purpose. You no longer force things to happen because they start flowing through you. Like a river that doesn't try to move yet nourishes the entire forest, you become that river where God's will moves through human form. This is the moment Jung called union with the self. It's not that you disappear, it's that you expand beyond the borders of the ego. You no longer serve God as something separate. You become the service itself, I once heard about a nurse who worked in a hospital. She said at first the job drained her. Every day I watched someone die. I prayed for strength but never heard anything. One day as she sat beside a dying old man, he held her hand and said, "You don't need to say a word. When you're here, I feel peace." She said, "I didn't hear God, but I realized maybe he was speaking through me." From that day, she stopped praying to hear him. She just lived with love, patience, and presence. Strangely, each day she began to feel guided not by logic, but by this quiet strength in her heart. Jung once said, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." Perhaps it's also the most sacred, because when you accept yourself fully, no longer dividing me from him, you become the instrument God can play. Neuroscience confirms this resonance. When people live in love, empathy, and presence, their brains literally synchronize with others. Meaning when one soul touches its own depth, it can actually tune the energy of those around it. Love and awareness become contagious, a divine resonance, just as Jung described. This is mirrored in the Virgin Mary, who didn't preach, didn't seek power, but simply said, "Let thy will be done through me." That surrender wasn't weakness, it was the deepest strength of the soul. When you stop resisting, stop controlling, and let his current move through you, you become the vessel through which love takes human form. Jung believed wholeness isn't about getting rid of darkness, but integrating it, letting both light and shadow serve one truth. When you stop rejecting your imperfect parts, God can use those very cracks to shine his light, because light only enters where the heart has broken. A beautiful image of this state is the candle. When lit, it doesn't try to shine, it simply is, and in being itself, it dispels darkness. Likewise, you don't need to convince anyone to believe in God. Just be the candle in the night, and whoever stands near you will see the light. At that stage, you no longer pray, "Lord, speak to me," but whisper, "Please speak through me," because you understand his voice was never far, it's just been waiting for a place to echo, and that place is the human heart. So if you've made it this far on the journey, remember, God isn't only speaking to you through your mind, he's trying to speak to the world through you. Let him. Let your life become a living prayer, so that when others look at you, they don't just see a person, they see a glimpse of the divine. And then you'll understand Jung's words. The self is not only the center, but also the whole circumference, which embraces both conscious and unconscious. It is the center of this totality, just as the ego is the center of consciousness. At that moment, you no longer just hear his voice, you are his voice in human form. Maybe you once believed you had to retreat from the world, pray for hours, or reach some special spiritual state to hear God. But Jung would smile and say, "You don't need to go anywhere. He's been with you long before you began to search." God doesn't speak through thunder, but through subtle intuition. Not through miracles, but through the small thoughts you often dismiss. When you are silent, when you live truthfully, when you choose love over fear, he is speaking through you. Every intuition, every coincidence, every pain is part of that ongoing conversation. So if today your mind suddenly feels calm, or a quiet thought brings peace to your heart, know this, it's not random. Perhaps he's whispering, "I'm still here," still guiding you. And if this video made you pause and listen more deeply, share it with someone who needs that same call. Because this journey will continue not for you to find God, but to realize he never left. Let every thought you live, every action you choose, be a gentle answer sent back to him. Thank you for staying with me till the end of this video. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel for more videos.